Good evening from Vietnam. Good morning to you, Susan. Thank you so much for spending your morning joining our Insight Sharing program and share your stories with our global audience. And on behalf of the listeners around the world, thank you.
It's a pleasure to be talking with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, Susan, have you been to Vietnam before?
No, I was going to say, so it's my dream in life to come to Vietnam. I've always wanted to go there. And so now that you reached out to talk to me, I'm thinking as we're talking, I've got to go, I've got to go. I'm dying to come visit. And no, I've never been.
Wow. Now you have a new friend, a new family
I
here.
do.
Yes. So if
Thank
you and your
you.
family decided to go and visit Asia, make sure you put Vietnam to the list and make sure you visit here, and then we will take you and your family around, show you
I'm going to
how
take you up
beautiful our
on it.
country. Yes, a lot of our speakers on the show also came here, and we were
Yeah.
able to take them around to see our beautiful city. So I look
Oh
forward to
my,
one day seeing you and your family here also.
thank you. Thank you. I'll be there.
Yeah. And I want to give you a little a taste of our culture. Okay, in Vietnam and in Asia in general, it's very honor if we can have you to do a little introduction about who you are and the works you are
Right.
doing. So that can you
Okay.
do it for us, please?
Absolutely, yes. So I'm a developmental psychologist. That means I study young children and how their various psychological capacities and characteristics change over time.
Mm.
And I teach at Williams College, which is, and I don't know how comparable this is to the higher ed scene in Vietnam, but it's a liberal arts college. It's very selective, so we tend to get wonderful, very bright students. Um, because we're a long established, very successful college, we're able to reach out and include students from all backgrounds. And that's very, very important to me. That a wide, it wasn't always the case at Williams. It used to be a place, 150 years ago for very privileged kids typically, and unfortunately, typically only white US born kids. That is no longer the case. It's a very international student body and also a very racially and ethnically and economically diverse student body. So for me, that's very important. Anyway, they're very bright kids. They're very excited to be there. They have all kinds of interests. And I teach courses in psychology,
Mm.
developmental psychology, but I'm also, if you've read some of my work, you know that I'm also very interested in education. That's
Yeah.
my passion. And so I also teach courses about teaching and schools. And I actually, within the college, direct our program in teaching. So students who are interested in studying education in some depth or in becoming teachers or creating their own schools or leading schools, I sort of guide them and create programming for them. Um, yeah, that's what I do. I do research in child development. As you may know, I'm particularly interested in curiosity and invention in childhood and how they develop. I'm very interested in how those processes do or don't play a role in school. Um, I write books. I'm working on a new book now.
Uh,
Uh, yeah. And what else can I say? I've done a lot of things related to schools. I helped start a school. I've written a lot of pieces about education for the general public, like in the New York Times and other publications. I'm very interested in making psychology and education interesting to the general public so that they can think about it, be part of helping to make it better. So that's a particular mission of mine beyond doing regular science.
Beautiful, beautiful, and thanks for doing that, Susan. We believe
Yeah.
that if we want to build a better world for everybody, it start with the way of thinking, be curious, how the education can change and evolve to help people to grow their capacity. And your research, your work is very important to add on to that, that movement of change. So thanks a lot. Okay.
Thank you.
And and today the whole conversation is for us to understand the journey that took you to doing that, because we're all born equally, and then everybody with each of us can take a different route path in life, right? And then your path is leading to what you are doing today. Would you like to travel
Yeah,
time with me?
sure. I have a good story about this.
All right.
So, When I was a little girl, my mother, I was born in New York City,
Oh.
and my mother was a social worker, and my father was a documentary filmmaker. But then when I was very little, when I was 2, my parents divorced. I have an older sister and an older brother, and my mother remarried, and she married a potato farmer in a very rural area, several hours out of the city. And so when I was 3, I moved to live on a potato farm. And my mother was not happy with the schools that were in this community. So she helped start a school that I went to that was very dynamic and lively. It had its problems. It was a little kooky, but I loved it. And I watched my mother start a school. So then when I loved growing up on a farm. I was very lucky. I had a happy childhood. Then I had a new baby sister who I loved very much. So there were 4 of us. And when I was a little girl, I was like 11, I got a job working for a 20-year-old girl who had started a summer program for kids. And I worked as her assistant. And it was just like, it just was chance that I happened to get that job, and I was good at it. I loved little kids. And in the middle of the summer, my boss, this 20 or 22-year-old girl, got sick, and she couldn't come to run the little summer camp. There were like 15 kids. They were like 3 and 4-year-olds. And there I was 11 years old, and I had to take care of them. I had to do the summer camp. And I thought to myself, well, if I could do this for her, I could do it on my own. So the next summer, on summer vacation, I started my own summer program. And I ran a program for kids, and I loved it. I loved it so much. I loved having started it. I loved working with kids, and I was lucky. I just had a knack for working with kids, even though I was sort of a kid myself. I mean, I was only 12. So I did that for many summers, and it was a very powerful experience in my life. But then, I got older and I went to college. College for me was an amazing experience. I felt that I had always felt this sense that nobody else at school was quite as eager as I was to read things, to talk about things, I was a little more eager about school than other kids. And when I got to college, it was like this sigh of relief, like, oh, this is where I belong. So then, in my second year, my advisor said, you have to take a course in child development. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in psychology. That's not for me. I wanted to study literature. I wanted to study philosophy. I studied children's theater because I had done a lot of theater in that summer camp that I had run. But I didn't want to take psychology. But my advisor said, you have to take this course. This is the course for you. And I took a course in language development with a developmental psychologist. And, it was love at first sight. I loved my professor. She was everything I wanted to be. I loved the studies I was reading. And I'm very, very lucky because I knew in that moment that this is what I wanted to do.
Wow.
So I studied psychology. I studied particularly developmental psychology. And, like I said, I loved school. I was a school person. And so when people at the college said, you should go on in this area, excuse me, I wanted to. I just didn't want to stop studying. And I wanted to be like my professor. I wanted to do what she did. So I went to graduate school in developmental psychology, and I got a PhD in developmental psychology. By then, I was married. And while I was in graduate school in New York City, I had my first child, and that was an amazing. I mean, talk about love at first sight. That was love at first sight. But I guess the other piece of this story is that for a long time, I didn't really think that my love of kids and education was connected to my love of research in developmental psychology. I thought of those as two separate things. And I had to make money while I was in graduate school, so I taught at schools in New York City And I loved that. I was good at it and I loved it, but I thought that was for making money and that my research was my research. Um, but I also began to realize that people doing research in child development, they didn't actually know enough about kids. Like they knew how to be good scientists and they knew how to, take a question and turn it into a beautiful experiment and collect the data and analyze the data, but they didn't actually know what kids were like. And I also thought, working in schools in New York, that teachers could be very good at teaching, but they didn't really know what scientists had learned about how language develops or how thinking changes over time or about the influences of certain experiences. And I thought, why are these two subjects so separate from each other? They belong together. And so I suppose for me, I saw that then as a mission in life, to bring those two things together. Education or the practice of teaching children and research in developmental psychology. And actually, then I left New York City. For those of your listeners who don't have a straight path in life, like I have a lot of students who are worried because while they're in college, they don't know exactly what their path is going to be. I had no path. I went from one crazy decision to another. Like after I got my PhD, I decided I didn't want to be an academic. And then I decided I didn't want to live in the city. And it was completely nutty. I can't believe my parents didn't freak out. I left New York City. My husband was a builder. We took a barn and made it into a house in a rural part of Massachusetts. I got a job teaching second grade. I thought, I'm not an academic. It's too stuffy. It's too political. It's too constricting. I'd rather teach kids. I taught for a year. I taught second grade. I had another baby. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I miss academia. I want to do research again. I miss talking to other people about articles. So then I got back into academia. But I told a student recently who was asking me about her future, I said, you don't have to follow a straight path. I said, my life is filled with zigzags. And my student said to me, I want that. I want zigs and I want zags. So that's sort of how I got to where I am. Yeah.
Thank you so much for.
Oh, and then I had another child. So I have 3 children, 3 sons.
Yes. So this Jack, Will, and Sam, right?
Oh, you know everything about me. Oh my God, yes, Jake.
Yeah, I told you I really like the works that you do, so I went on and then research more about the works and the articles and stuff to get to know more about the field you are working on, Susan. So tell them I say hello also when you have a chance.
I certainly will. Oh my God, they'll be tickled. And I also have 4 very small grandchildren who live right next door to me.
Wow.
Yeah. So well, I'll tell them I met you too.
Yeah, absolutely. Say hello from Vietnam. And then if your children decided to take their family to Vietnam, tell them they have a new friend also here.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Susan, I want to bring you to the summer camp when you're at 11 years old. All right. And I think that is important because that forced for you to start your first love for for children, for teaching, everything set for at that moment, that period of summer.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that summer? What did you guys do that ignite the love for something that you're gonna carry for the rest of your life like this?
Right. Well, let me think about that a little bit. So, first of all, I help people become teachers. I teach teachers. So I believe that I think it's something you can learn to do. And I think that it's not something you're either a born teacher or you're not a teacher. I don't believe in that. But I do believe that teaching is an incredibly hard and challenging thing to do. As hard and challenging as brain surgery. It's why I tell my students that only the best of them, many of them will become doctors and lawyers and bankers because it's a very good college and people get very good jobs, but only the best of them can become teachers. Those other jobs are easy in comparison. And when I say that, it's partly because there are a lot of things you need to learn to be a good teacher, but there's also talent. just like to be a good brain surgeon, you have to go to good medical school and have good trainers and supervisors, but you also have to have very good hands to be a brain surgeon. And in the same way, to work with children, you have to have a sort of feel for kids, and you have to be interested in them. And I was just lucky I had those things. That was just good luck. I don't have good hands. I would be a bad surgeon. I'm short and unathletic, so I would be a bad basketball player. But those are things that are very hard to do, but they take talent. And working with kids, I had a knack for that. So that was one thing. And it was summer camp, so it took I could be spontaneous and creative. And I loved thinking of things for the kids to do that would be very absorbing to them, but that once they started doing, they wouldn't need a lot of instructions and supervision. And that's something that stayed with me through my whole life. I've done a lot of curriculum development and a lot of supervision of teachers. And I always say, think of activities where you don't have to be telling them what to do all the time. Because often that's where teachers go wrong and schools go wrong. They're so busy thinking of the instructions and getting children to be good at following the instructions, they forget that the more time kids spend following instructions, the less energy they can give to just being involved in the thing. So if so we did a lot of things in that summer camp that were very absorbing. We played in the sand. One day a little girl was crying because she missed her mom so much and wanted her. She was only like 3. And I said, okay, let's all make clocks. And then we can watch the time, and we'll make a clock, and then we'll watch, what time it is and when your mom will be coming. So I had the experience of coming up with activities for kids that really grabbed them. And they didn't have to be something from a book, or now it would be something from online. It would be what I thought of, I guess, and I've never thought of this before, but I think that many schools and teachers don't realize how valuable it is to use your imagination when you're a teacher.
Wow. Yep.
Because you have to be spontaneous and think of what's going to fit those kids and help them in whatever goal you have for them in that moment. And that requires imagination. And a lot of people have imagination. They just don't realize that they should use it when they're working with kids. So that's one. What else did I learn then? I learned that you should do something you love. And I've been very, very lucky in my life. I've done things that I really love to do. And for me, waking up in the morning, you can't love everything you do. Like, I hate grading, and I hate writing letters of recommendation. But every day there's at least one thing I'm going to be doing at work that I can't wait to do. And I wanted my kids to be. That's something that felt very important to me, raising my kids. That they would get up each morning feeling that there was something about their work that would be not only meaningful but pleasurable.
Beautiful. At 11 years old, and you start to form that imaginative mind in bring creativity to the work at the summer camp, right? I want to travel to earlier time. Was there anybody in your life that played that big figures for you to role model, and be a role model for you to start like that? Yes. Can you share?
Yes. Were you sure? Well, first of all, as I said, my mother, a couple of things I'll share. My mother cared about education. She started the school that I went to. That was it was a kooky place, but it made me realize school could be wonderful and that everybody could have a role in a school. Like, my mother said, I'll start one. And I thought, oh, you could just do things. You can start a school if you want to. So she had a lot of, she had a great sense that she could make things happen. And I think she was a role model for me in that way. My stepfather, whom I was very close to and adored, he died years ago, but he was a farmer. And he wasn't educated. He did not go to college. His father was a farmer. His grandfather had been a farmer. but he was incredibly smart and he was incredibly good at the things he did. And he taught me how to do a lot of things. And he taught me how to do them by having me do them alongside of him.
Oh.
So he didn't explain things to me. He just said, get on the tractor and drive the tractor. Or here, we'll plant this row of peas. Do it next to me. You put the pea in, I'll dig the hole. And I think I learned from that children learn by doing.
Yeah.
And that became a very important piece of my ideas about education. And I also, and my father, my biological father, whom I went on seeing and having a relationship with, was a very intellectual person. He loved ideas. I was just thinking about it the other day because I was singing a song in the woods with my dog to scare off the bears. I will say that the reason I was singing was because there are bears where I live, and I don't want them to scare me. So I sing when I'm in the woods, and I was singing an old medieval song that my father had taught me. And my father's been dead a long time too, but I was remembering that as a little girl, any word that I didn't understand, there were several words in the medieval song that I didn't know. They're not part of modern English. And I can remember asking him what the words meant. And he just loved to explain to me any word. There was no question I couldn't ask him that he wouldn't want to dive into an answer with me. And so I guess from him, his role model was a love of the exploration of ideas. So I've never thought about that before, Hal, but each of them gave me an invaluable lesson in the way that they lived their lives and the way that they were. And then I would add something. I think all of them, to some extent, yes, all of them, those three, my two dads and my mom, they were not conventional. And they did not feel constrained by convention, nor were they motivated by money. None of them chose work for which money was the main goal. And I think that had a very profound influence on me. As long as you can, and this has been supported by research in modern times, as long as your work can make enough money for you to have, a home, which is not easy for people to do, at least in the United States. So that's not easy. I'm not making light of that. But if you can have a home, and if you have food security, if you know that you and yours, your family, have food to eat, and depending on your healthcare system, medical care when you need it, more and more money does not make you happier, but work that is meaningful and pleasurable does.
Yeah.
So I think I was very lucky that I had parents my stepdad was a farmer. He barely made enough, but he did. And I think that was a gift to me.
Yeah.
Also, none of them thought you had to do things the way other people did them. They weren't very conventional.
Wow. Susan, when you say that your life went through a lot of zigzags, right? I was questioning about it a little bit, but I think it's a talent from within you at very young age to be able to be a very good observer also. So you observe, your mom, your two fathers, and learn the great things from whatever they did, because a lot of us living in our environment, we may be nurtured by some good example. We don't have the ability to see, to reap the benefit from that. So that becoming a waste also, isn't it?
Yes, although, when I was a kid, I don't think I thought about those influences. I think I was just shaped by them. And, I'm a developmental psychologist, so I love to think about how people are shaped by their childhoods and also how they're not shaped by their childhoods.
Yeah.
I could give you examples of things that I rejected about my childhood and wanted to do differently. But I think my ability to reflect on that came a lot later in my life. I think when I was a kid, I think everybody's shaped by the people around them. And I think the thing that's difficult, let me think about this, is as you get older to be thoughtful about when you want to try to break free of that a little bit, when you want to reject. I'll give you an example. So I have a lot of students at Williams who come from backgrounds where families, I can think of two examples, families that are either very religious or not very religious. And my student, the kid, realizes in college that they don't agree with their parents. They either begin to not believe in God, and their parents do believe in God, or the opposite. They grew up in an atheistic family that weren't religious, and they begin to feel drawn towards some religious practice. It takes a lot of bravery to do that, and it can be hard for people to make that conscious decision. And the other place where this is really a challenge is in politics. So I have quite a number of students who come from a family that had one set of political beliefs, and at some point they begin to question those beliefs. And that's a case where for some people there's a moment when you think, I no longer can accept that. And that's hard, especially if you love your family. You're like, I still love them, but I'm not going to believe those things anymore. And I've had that about some things, Yeah.
Yeah. Susan, I think that's fair also, because each of us, we need to have that moment of realization to form our own belief, our own definition of the world around us, and then it will shape us into who we are also, and having our own identity instead of having identity keep built up from somebody else, right?
Exactly.
So I want to bring you to the moment that you went to university at the second year in university, when your advisor asked you to take the developmental psychology classes, right?
Yeah.
And then at the beginning, you rejected that idea.
Yeah.
Okay. What happened in your mind back then that made you reluctant to take on the course?
Well, I'll tell you exactly. So my mom had been trained as a social worker, and my father, my biological father, who he was very educated. He went to Harvard. He was super smart and intellectual, and they became adults in the 40s and early 50s. They were Jewish. It was a very Jewish and intellectual milieu that they lived in, and so they were very taken with psychoanalysis. That was a time when people of my biological dad and my mother's background were very excited about the possibilities of psychoanalysis, and they were both went to analysis.
Oh.
And I was so sick of hearing about Freud and psychoanalysis, and in my mind, that's what psychology was. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not studying that. That's a case where I thought I wanted to reject what my parents were. I was like, no, that's them. That's not me. I'm not studying psychology. I'm studying literature, philosophy. It's partly that I rejected it because I was just so sick of hearing about it from them. And I was dubious about whether it had really affected either of them in a good way. And then, and so it was that, and that it just didn't seem like it fit my interests. But my advisor, whom I loved so much, and he was a literature professor. He wasn't a psychology professor. I studied 19th century fiction with him. And I have something to say about that in a minute. But he just kept pushing on me. You have to take it. You have to take it. Just give it a chance. You'll love it. And the minute I took it, it was like this was nothing like what I thought the course was going to be. We read experiments about how children learn to use words and about how their minds work. Like, I had no idea that's what psychology was, or that that's what it could be. I had no idea that from my background that I would love science as a field, that experiments were so exciting to read, and that thinking about how to design an experiment that would answer a certain question, that process was so absorbing, because that's not the kind of psychology I had been exposed to through my parents. So I don't know whether your listeners or whether people who listen to this show in Vietnam or internationally will know what I mean about that distinction, but for me it was a very important one. As it turned out, I came to love Freudian theory very much and think of it as the foundation of all contemporary psychological research. And I wrote about it in my most recent book. And so it ended up being part of what I know and think about, but not psychoanalysis itself, which is a very particular therapeutic process that I don't set much store by. But that didn't matter. And, that wasn't the relevant issue. The one thing I will say about that professor, so I was a reader growing up, and I loved novels, and I still do. And for kids growing up and young people who feel trapped by the environment in which they grow up, who feel like these are not my role models, but what are my role models? Or this life, the life of their neighborhood or their home, is not for me, but I don't know what else there is. I would say read novels, because novels open the whole world to you. Whether you become a mathematician or a banker or a psychologist or a teacher or whatever it is you do, novels let you travel the world, and they let you meet people that from everywhere and from every era. I mean, from every time period. So for me, novels, even as a psychologist and a scientist, I would say novels are the key to finding out about the world outside of your own immediate experience, if that doesn't feel like enough for you.
And Susan, I think that we all own that professor a big thank you, because he's the one who relentlessly push you to take and advise you to take on that psychology class, right? And so he's also had a very good vision about education, how to help people to improve their the education system also himself. Have you ever thought in your head, why did he try to persuade you that hard to get into that course?
Oh, that's a great question. He knew me.
Oh.
So where I went to college, you took a course with your advisor in your first year. You took it for a whole year, and you were sort of you were just kind of randomly assigned. I guess you listed before you got to college a few of your interests, and I probably said literature because I already was a reader. So I was assigned to him. He taught 19th century novels. I had read a lot of the books already, but I read them again gladly. I mean, Jane Eyre and Anna Karenina and Crime and Punishment. Oh my God, such good books. And in addition to taking a course with him, and it was a small course, there were 15 of us in the seminar, you met with the professor. It was sort of based on the Oxford model. You met with the professor once a week, just one-on-one, to talk about some particular line of study. So I think I studied Tolstoy as my contact work with him, like a tutorial. And the real thing, I mean, there were a lot of great things about that model, but one was your professor, your advisor, you didn't just meet him at the beginning of September and again in April to check in. He talked to you every week. And he talked to you about your studies, but he talked to you about you and your thoughts and your life. And so he got to know me, and he was very perceptive. And I think he saw something in me I didn't see in myself, which is that I would be someone who would love research psychology, like the science of psychology. I don't know what he saw. I don't know that he's died a few years ago. I can't ask him, but that's what he was good at, because I don't know that I'm that good at that as a professor. I don't think I am. I don't think I have the skill he had for seeing in each of my students what it is they would love that they don't yet know about. I think I was just very lucky that I was given that as a teacher, because I was assigned to him, and he saw something about me I couldn't quite see for myself. I was very young. I was 17 when I started college, and I'm not sure I would have known that. I don't think I would have.
Wow.
I mean, now you could say, I suppose, it's true that I think I already knew that I loved college, that I wanted to do something that allowed me to go on acting like a college student for the rest of my life. I mean, we always laugh about that. people who teach college were like, yeah, we just wanted to stay in college forever. That's why we became college professors. But I don't think any field would have suited me quite as well as the one I went into, and that was him.
Mm.
So yes, I agree with you. Thank you, Ilya Wax. That was his name.
Ilya
Ilya
Wax.
Wax. Oh my God, what a great guy.
Imagine if all teachers are like him. You know how lucky the students would be. You know how beautiful their life, their experiments, their thinking about the present, the futures, and the works that they do will be so meaningful, isn't it? And I think that initial push from him, paved the road for you to start get into the path of making a significant change in thinking and in education.
I would say that, but I would add something.
Yes, please.
I would add two things. He was wonderful, but too much emphasis is placed, I think, in the general public on the importance of some perfect, brilliant teacher or professor. And that's not fair and impossible to think it all rests on these brilliant, perfect people, because it rests on two other things as well.
Oh.
It rests on school environments that make the opportunity for teachers to get to know small groups of students very well a top priority. So no teacher, no matter how brilliant and wonderful they are, can do what he did if the structure of the school doesn't allow them to spend real time with a reasonable number of students. If you see 30 children every hour and 30 different, if you encounter 175 students a week, no matter how brilliant you are, you cannot make that connection and get to know them. The schools, whether they're universities or elementary schools or high schools, should make that kind of environment a top priority. He was at a college that made that a priority. Every incoming student was in a seminar of 15 students for a whole year with one professor. So that's number one. And number two, that goes with that, those schools also have to make a close relationship between the teacher and the kids as important as the material that the kid learns. So being known by an adult, very well known, and getting to know that adult very well, that's a key, essential ingredient of a good school experience. And that's true for 5-year-olds, 15-year-olds, and 21-year-olds. And those are two things that have more to do with both the structure and the goals of education than the wonderful qualities of the teacher. That's very important too. But they're all important. If you went to a hospital, you would say we have to have great surgeons, or internists or whatever. We have to have great equipment, the best MRI machine and the best, and we have to have great, let me see, what was the third? I mean, I can think of several things they have to have, but great, absolute clean conditions, like, immaculate operating rooms and everybody washing their hands, as the Tulpa one day would say, before they go into every patient's room. So there are a lot of things that are necessary. No one questions that when it comes to a hospital, that there are several different components you need. Great nurses, because we all accept that to make a good hospital requires all these different components, but schools are just the same and they're just as important. So that's why I would just add, yes, Ilya Wax, my professor, was an amazing person, but he was also in a school that had both the right structure, the right setup to allow him to be his wonderful self, and it made that the relationship between the professor and the students a top priority.
Wow. But the way I see school system around the world at the moment, they are under budget and with a lot more students and at the school. So it seems like that. Is that the question I want to ask is that feasible for us to change the education system where they can have a handful of of students so that the teacher can have more quality time with the student and create the environment where they can create that trust and bond so that they can share and the teacher become the catalyst of change for the people, for the students?
Yes.
Yes, good to
I
hear.
mean, well, let me say one thing. First of all, I'm thinking about this a lot because I'm writing a book now about kindergarten, and I spent a year traveling all over the country, the United States, visiting kindergartens.
Mm.
Next, I want to do it internationally. So, but for now, I'm just doing it.
Vietnam.
And and so I'm thinking a lot about this question you asked me. Schools should have more funding. It's outrageous. It's a travesty that we care so little about children, that we give such little amount of money to schools as opposed to other institutions. It's just sickening. In my view, at least in the United States, it's because people care about their own children, but they don't really care about other people's children. So, everyone's reluctant to give a lot of money to other people's children. But set that aside because that's a political and economic issue. I think schools should have more money. I just want to be very unambiguous about that. But even with the money they have, they could go much further in making the relationship between teachers and students a priority and making it possible for children and teachers to work in smaller groups. And I don't mean that we should get rid of content. My life as a student and a teacher has always been that there has to be something you're all working on that matters a lot. It's English literature, it's Asian literature, it's biology, it's calculus, it's French history, whatever, or woodworking. Kids need to learn things, but we need to let go of the idea that all kids need to learn all these different things. If we got rid of that idea and said, okay, instead we're going to make it possible for every group of kids to be in a smaller group, for every teacher to have the chance to work with a smaller group in a sustained way over time, and to work on things. Could, like any number of things. But what you'd have to give up something, and what I think we should give up is this illusion of breadth or mandatory curriculum across 10 topics. I mean, if you look, I don't know about in Vietnam, but in the United States, if you look at a list, I mean, the Common Core, which is our newest attempt at a national curriculum, it's far better than the one before it that was a product of something called No Child Left Behind, which was a disaster. But Common Core is pretty good, but even Common Core has kids rushing from one topic to another, 40 minutes of this and 40 minutes of that, and they have to learn this skill and that skill and that skill, and that's the big barrier to reaching the goal of teachers and kids who can get to know each other. And by the way, as important as it is to learn, to have some exposure to a variety of topics and skills, it's equally important for kids to have the experience of immersion and mastery. And you just can't do all of those things in 6 or 7 hours a day. It's just not possible. So something's got to give. And I wish that, I could be the editor who would edit the master plan of schools, because I'd like to cut some things out to make room for other things to take more time.
Yeah. Earlier.
How's that a megalomaniacal fantasy?
Yeah, well, but that fantasy is good. It's good because it's aiming to create something better. Yeah, and that's making improvement. The way I see it is like you say, you're moving from no kid left behind into the common core is a bit improvement already. So it means that the people already making progress. Let's appreciate the progress and then continue to change the system along the way. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love the way you said that. Yep.
Yep. And you say earlier, being a teacher is the hardest professions because like other profession, they only great people can be a teacher. So great minds, when put together, they will create something significant. I believe so, and I hope that to come for the great sake for our children. And Susan, and my wife and I, we love to ask the secret behind thinking, because you mentioned the word I think a lot during the conversation today. All right, and then every conversation like we always ask our guests this question, because we believe that the ability to think for people these days is diminishing with so many distracts out there. And you, as a great thinker, we want to ask you, how have you been growing your ability to think over the years though?
What a great question. God, I love that question. I have to think about it. I'll speak as a developmental psychologist and as a grandma. Well, I'll tell you a little story.
Yes,
So the other
please.
day I was in the car with my 4-year-old grandson. His name is Henry. And Henry was looking out the window at some trees that had no branches on the bottom part. And he said, "Those trees have no branches. Is there a reason for that?" And I was so excited, I practically lifted off the seat. I was like rushing to write it down in my notebook, because it was a reminder that very young children, and this I know from my own research, because this is what I do research on as a scientist, young children love to think, and it feels good to think. It feels as good to think as it does to skip or eat or laugh. It just feels good to think. And we unfortunately, the school system often makes kids think they don't like to think. Instead of a cookie, it feels like a vitamin, a medicine, but it's like a cookie. It feels good. And so, and so it feels good to me. I think I'm lucky because I ended up on a path that made that a very obvious part of my everyday life. So writing is, in my experience, writing is the best way to push myself to think, because often I have an idea, I think it's such a great idea, and I sit down to write about it in my new book, and then I write it out and I think it's not a great idea. I can see in the sentences it's a stupid idea, and then I have to start all over. Or I have an idea, and then I think, wait a minute, but I have no proof that this is true, or I haven't made an argument that would convince anyone else, and then I realize I have more thinking to do. So for me, writing has been a way to push my thinking. But then I work in a college, and I have all these smart young people around me who ask me questions in class, and then I think, wait a minute, whoops, I need to think about that. It's like talking to you. You ask a question, I think, oh, I never thought of that, let me think. So partly it's looking for partners, people to talk to, and wanting to talk to them about interesting things, because besides writing, talking to other people is a way to get your own thinking to be better. And then I would say that I live in a country where there's been incredible political divide. I mean, and my politics I have very strong politics. And there are a lot of people in the last, I'll say, 7 years that I've disagreed with very vehemently. And what that's taught me is how important it is to keep pushing yourself to change your mind.
Wow.
I won't change my mind about everything. There are certain things that have happened in this country in the last 7 years. I know this is probably not what I'm supposed to talk about on your show, but there are things that have happened that I won't change my mind about because I thought they were too terrible, that have to do with human rights and human dignity and equity. But it's also taught me how many people lost the capacity, maybe they never had it, to think about information and other people's point of view and reconsider their own ideas. And so that's another thing that I teach more than I used to. So we were laughing yesterday because my sisters were teasing me that I say all the time in the middle of a discussion, do you think I'm right or do you think I'm wrong? Or do you think I'm wrong about that? And I was saying I do that more than I should. It's like a bad habit to say that because I want my students to realize that I'm old, I'm 64. I still want to be able to ask people if they think I'm wrong.
Oh,
And so, I'm very lucky because I work in a college, so I get to be talking about ideas and thoughts all the time, and I read all the time. But even if you don't, even if you work in a garden or you're in a kitchen cooking, or and especially if you teach, you find a way, like to keep questioning yourself and asking, am I wrong? What would make me wrong? Because I think that helps people be thinkers. And then I wish more people realized that it's more like a cookie and less like a vitamin.
Susan, you do a lot of research on how to help kids to be curious and invention,
Yeah.
and I think that a part of teaching them how to be curious is also to teach them the what stopped them from being curious, right? So in your research, if you can share one or two points that really key killers of our curious mind, what would those be and why?
You mean what should we do to encourage curiosity?
Not to encourage curiosity, but what we should stop doing so that we can grow curiosity.
Well, so yes, to be honest, scientists don't yet fully know all the reasons why curiosity seems to diminish a bit as kids get older. So every parent who listens to your show knows what it's like to have an 18-month-old. They're curious about everything all the time. They put it in their mouth, they rattle on it, they open it, they ask a million trillion questions, and that diminishes over time. Partly that's because as we get older, we get more familiar with the world around us, so we don't have to ask as many questions about it. And also there are other things that take its place, like knowing, not asking questions, but sharing what you already know. So some of that is inevitable. But I would say that one reason curiosity diminishes is because we give kids less permission to ask questions.
Oh.
It's just, so my research shows that when kids get to school, they ask far fewer questions and they have far fewer opportunities to get answers to those questions or ask a second question, or they don't get help answering their questions. Like, you could have a kid in school say, why does, I'm trying to think of a good example. Why does butter get hard in some circumstances and melt into a liquid in others? I don't know why I thought of that. That's just because it was breakfast recently here, but breakfast time. But any number of questions. Why is there global warming? Might be a question. And then instead of saying we don't have time for that question, or that's not the topic we're studying now, answer the question or help your student figure out what they would need to do to get an answer. Because encouraging that curiosity is about the best educational skill you can give them.
I know.
And you need teachers. You don't just need wild freedom to pursue that. You need help learning how to make your questions better, how to get the right kind of answers that really will answer your question, the right kind of data, and knowing how to assess when your question's been answered. So there's a huge role for teachers and schools to play in that process. But the one thing that schools mostly do is the worst thing, which is to discourage question asking.
I know. And a lot of elder people in my country had the tendency also, like parents, when children ask a lot of questions, it's not related to you, don't ask that questions, or you would not understand it. Instead of make sense for them, trying to make sense something for them, they're trying to push it away so that children will have less opportunity to do. Well, look at our world. A lot of good people get together, ask questions, what's on the other side of the mountain, what's on the other side of the river, what's on the other side of the ocean. That's how we conquer the world, right? We travel and meet, and create the new world. I have two last questions for our conversations. today.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And we travel the past. We knew, your childhood in the very supportive environments, and we knew your at 11 years old you first formed your love for teaching, for education and stuff. We know what you are doing now. We want to know a future a little bit. And I know that you are working on a new book. So can you
Yes.
share something about that so that we can celebrate with you in advance?
Sure. Well, I'm writing a book about kindergarten.
Uh,
I'm having more fun. I just can't tell you how much fun it is. I traveled all over the country first visiting kindergartens, and I hope to finish that book in the next year or so.
wow.
So that's to help me celebrate that because I'm very excited about it, and I love the process of doing that. I don't know what I'll do after that. Who knows what my next book will be or whether I will write another book. I might. I have a lot of questions that I haven't answered in my research yet, so I have a lot left to do, I hope.
Wow.
Yeah, that's my answer.
Wow. Thank you. The last question is about the one thing that you mentioned earlier that's very important. You say that every single day you go into, you wake up, go into work, you will have at least one thing important that you love doing.
Yes.
Okay. And a lot of us out there going to work, living our life, have nothing really meaningful attached to their feelings, to their workings. So if you can give an advice for the people who listen to the show to really look for something that they love doing and really, really, bring them hold dear to their heart and their life, can you share some insights for us?
Yes, I can. I think people should find work that has some meaning or delight in it. But I know that not everyone has that opportunity. If you can, and you're making a lot of money, but you hate your work, quit your job and do something that makes less money and is more pleasurable. And often the pleasure comes from the meaning it has in the world, the purpose it serves. But if you're not in that, if you don't have that opportunity, because people don't always have that opportunity, develop something you love to do that you can think about during the day when you're doing the thing you don't love. There are so many people in the world whose real joy was something they did outside of work that had great meaning, not just to pass the time away, not just to eat candy, but something that, whether it's making art or writing or singing or being in a political group or volunteering but something with meaning and purpose. And daydreaming is an incredibly can be a savior for people whose daily job is not rewarding. So you spend your day daydreaming about the thing that means the world to you after the end of the day. Cooking, I love to cook, so for me it would be cooking, carving in wood, writing fiction, whatever it is. Find a way to put something pleasurable and meaningful into your life. And if your job is hard, the antidote is not just to watch TV all evening, to take your mind off your job. It's to do something with joy and purpose in it.
Beautiful, beautiful. As I had two last question, but I changed my mind. If I can ask one last question, would that be okay?
Of course.
Susan, imagine now you have a way to travel back in time to see yourself, and I want to go to the specific self as Susan when she in the potato field with her father, and then learning from her father. He dig a hole and then you put stuff in and stuff. At the end of that day, you had a chance to talk to that little Susan. What would you tell her about the world that you want her to grow up?
About the world or
About
the
the
world?
future, the world.
The world. Oh my God.
Whatever you want to tell her,
I want to. I'll say two answers. They don't really go together because my sisters and I just asked this question to
Oh,
ourselves yesterday. I would have realized a lot earlier in my life that I love science and math. I grew up in a culture where girls didn't think they liked science and math, and I really would have loved to go further into those fields earlier. That's one thing.
Okay.
About the world, I wish that I had become more politically active earlier in my life, because no one can stand on the side about politics. We all need to work very hard to make the world. Well, I want everybody who agrees with me to be working hard. I want the people who don't agree with me to go to bed and take a long nap. But you know, if you care about other people, you have to take a stand.
Yeah.
And do it right away, because I waited too long in my life for that, and I regret that.
You do well, don't regret. Don't regret. Susan, thanks a lot for the beautiful conversation, for the wonderful chance for me to and the audience to knowing you and having you to our show. It's delightful to see your smile, your enthusiasm, your passion, and the love, the energy. We can see it, we can feel it, and we wish you, we wish you all the best. And I really look forward to see one day to see you and your family here in my country, and that will be so lovely.
Well, it's been a total joy to talk with you. You're a wonderful interviewer. I've had many. You're one in a million, and it made me want to come to Vietnam even more. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a wonderful week and say hello to everybody for us. Okay.
I certainly will. Bye bye.
Bye bye.